You're listening to the Vox Media Podcast Network.
The UFC is back in the Lone Star State where the stars at night are big and bright, and someone's mantle will be a little bit brighter with interim heavyweight gold come Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon. Depends on what time they get back home, but we'll find out the answer to that question tomorrow night as we welcome you to the UFC 265 preview show here on MMAfighting.com. Going old school on this Friday. I am Mike Heck, joined by Shad Al-Shadi and the Prince of Positivity, Alexander K. Lee. And Sean, right off the bat, look, there isn't an undisputed title fight. We don't have Conor McGregor. We don't have any of the Diaz brothers. No extra bells and whistles. We got an interim title fight, which is essentially, in this case, a higher paying number one contenders fight in the main event between Derrick Lewis and Cyril Gane, with the prize of fighting Francis Ngannou at stake. But the rest of this card, it might not be like the biggest names in the world. There's some really interesting fights. A lot of preliminary fight of the night conversations are already ongoing. As a fan of just fights and matchmaking, is this a fight card top to bottom that has you excited and intrigued heading into tomorrow?
Oh, man, that's a tough question, right? Because ultimately, I know we call AK the Prince of Positivity, but I like to think I'm a pretty positive person too. I don't want to come in here and crap on anything or really go negative right off the bat. But it is hard to look at this card and the permutation that we got in the end game of it and not think about what should have been, right? Because this ultimately, this would be a great fight night card. This would be a A+ level fight night card. But for a pay-per-view, it is certainly feels like it's lacking a bit. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of enthusiasm and excitement around it. The main event is a great fight, man. It is. Derrick Lewis, Cyril Gane, that's a tremendous fight. It's just everything around it that really poisons the well a little bit, right? Like this should have been Jon Jones and Francis Ngannou. If nothing else, it should have been Francis Ngannou versus Derrick Lewis. Like we should have been seeing the best heavyweight in the world. And instead we get the silliest, stupidest interim title fight that I have seen in a long, long time. Like none of this makes any sense. Francis Ngannou just fought a couple of months ago, and we don't need to relitigate that all of just how this came to be, but it just does feel anticlimactic. It feels low stakes despite the relatively high stakes around it. I don't know. It's hard to wash that taste out of our mouths, man, or at least out of my mouth, because again, Jon Jones, Francis Ngannou should be happening. And at the very least, Francis Ngannou should be happening. Instead, we have this sort of weird Frankenstein monster version of a card where, we don't even really have much here to hold on to. The best fight is a fake fight, really, a fight that doesn't mean much, but does mean much in the grand scheme of things, if that makes sense. So enthusiasm for it. I'm maybe a 7 out of 10, which is pretty low for a pay-per-view, but ultimately there are a lot of fights on this card that I would imagine will deliver to some degree. I mean, you look at up and down, Jose Aldo's on this. That's my guy. You got Chiesa, Luque on it as well. Tisha Torres, Angela Hill rematch. Like there are good fights up and down this card. So let's focus on that.
AK, you are the Prince of Positivity. And not long ago, we lost the second title fight on this card. Really the only like actual title fight between Amanda Nunes and Juliana Pena. Nunes, as everybody knows, tested positive for COVID, and the fight was postponed to a later date. I know Pena, who crashed the press conference, mentioned December. I'm told very light talks at best. Not a ton of movement on that, but there is talks about December rebooking that fight. But I'm wondering if you felt this card took a real big hit losing that fight. Like it is a title fight, sure, but I think there's enough fireworks potential that it didn't really hurt it that much. Like, do you agree with that?
Anytime you miss out on the chance to watch Amanda Nunes fight, I feel like something has been lost, because especially since we do know in her career, given both, again, where she is in her life and the level of kind of lackluster level of competition that she's had at 135 and 145 over the last 18 months, last 2 years, she doesn't have a lot of fights left. I don't think so anyway. It'll change if suddenly there's a surge of contenders, certainly in the divisions in which she holds titles. It's just hard to predict that sort of thing. And I'm a positive person. I'm an optimist, Mike, but I mean, just based on what I know about these divisions right now, I just don't sense that rush of challenges coming. So yeah, anytime we missed on the chance to compete, it kind of sucks. I do expect this is one that will be rebooked shortly, assuming, there's no hopefully no COVID complications for Amanda Nunes, and and she can avoid testing positive in the future. But it did weaken the card. I will say also, but it was screwy from the beginning, because that fight should have been the main event with respect to Derrick Lewis and Ciryl Gane and the shiny interim heavyweight title. They got to give respect to Amanda Nunes. I know she hasn't drawn as a pay-per-view headliner. There's no arguing with that. But I don't. It's not like Derrick Lewis. I don't feel like Derrick Lewis and Ciryl Gane are necessarily proven sales pay-per-view movers either, right? I know they're heavyweights, and in general, heavyweights in combat sports there's an inherent interest there, but it's not a guarantee. So I feel like it wouldn't have mattered if they had Nunes and Pena at the top of the marquee, and then Lewis and Gane below them. But I guess it's a moot point now. So something was lost. I don't know how much it hurt it. I don't think that this was going to be a massively selling pay-per-view anyway. So definitely for the fans, like hardcore fans planning to tune in, regardless, it hurts. Mainstream interest, I feel like probably didn't hurt it that much.
Sean, let's talk about this main event, because we initially reacted to this booking and slapping an interim title on it. And it doesn't seem like your mind has changed very much. I've since gotten over it. It is what it is. Two guys are going to make more money. They're basically fighting for a number one contender spot, and they'll get a belt and whatever, it is what it is. But you got Derrick Lewis looking to get back into an undisputed title fight after the loss to Daniel Cormier against a really mature, well-rounded, technical up-and-comer in Ciryl Gane, who has yet to be even truly tested or put through the ringer in any way in his MMA career, in and out of the UFC, looking to strike gold in just his 10th professional fight. This is a remarkable story of just a meteoric rise for Ciryl Gane. Like, however you feel about the interim title, we're going to put that on the barn burner. You said it's an interesting fight. From a stylistic perspective, like, what about this fight sticks out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I do like this fight ultimately, just when you bare bones it down to what it actually is, right? Because the two converging storylines are actually very fascinating and also quite opposite, I would say. I mean, Derrick Lewis at this point is a guy who for a long time was sort of looked at as if like he's just not good at MMA in a strange way, right? Like there's sort of this weird way of thinking around Derrick Lewis that he's just kind of getting lucky all this time. And it's like, that doesn't happen over and over again. Like, you don't get lucky for a decade, right? Like, he is who he is. And he's this guy who maybe he's not technically the most proficient, and maybe he's not technically the best all around fighter, but he's someone who can end a fight at any moment's notice. And we've seen him do it throughout his career. And at this point, he's really carved himself one of the better MMA heavyweight careers that we have ever seen, at least in the UFC. Like, he is a genuine Hall of Fame borderline type of candidate right now at this stage of his career, with the records that he has, the wins that he's gotten, and just, this is his second title fight, if we want to call it a title fight. He has quietly been great for most of his UFC heavyweight career, and I don't feel like we think of him in that way. And so this is almost an interesting sort of culmination of all of that, right? Because he is 36, and in the heavyweight division, we can see fighters go longer. We can see fighters even become champion late in their 30s. So I wouldn't say this is the last gasp for Derrick Lewis. This is the last chance he's going to get, but it does feel like the best chance that he's going to get to ever hold UFC gold. And then on the other side of this, Ciryl Gane is just such a total polar opposite, right? Like, this is really the second time that Ciryl Gane's coach, Ferdinand Lopez, has done this, where he's taken a incredibly raw, but incredibly, talented, just physically gifted, athletic specimen of an athlete, and really within a span of 3 years, guided them from not being anything in MMA, not knowing what this sport was, into being a UFC title challenger. We just saw it a couple of years ago with Francis Ngannou. Obviously, that partnership is no longer here anymore. Ferdinand Lopez has moved on, and so is Francis. But the fact that Ferdinand Lopez is doing this for a second time so quickly in this division, I find to be very, very impressive. And Ciryl Gane, I mean, he seems like, from at least what we've seen, the total package, right? Like, he has the submission, a very sneaky, underrated submission game. He is a very powerful striker. We've seen him get these big knockouts, but also he is just someone who is so able to manage the game, right? He is a game manager when he needs to be. We've seen it in these last couple 2 fights against Rosenstruck and Volkov. He has no qualms about going 5 rounds and just being slightly better than you for all 5 of those rounds. And that feels like a very direct path to victory that he could pull off against a Derrick Lewis. But then you always have the black beast factor, where Derrick Lewis could be losing this fight for the first 23, 24 minutes of it, and then he could absolutely win it in that last minute, no matter how hurt or how tired he is. So in that regard, it's a fascinating fight, I think, both on a storyline level and also just on a physicality level in terms of the skill sets that these guys bring into the cage. So I love the fight in and of itself when it's just boiled down to that dynamic, because it is just totally anybody's game. I know Derrick Lewis is coming into this as a massive underdog, which is very typical for Derrick Lewis in his career. He comes into these big fights as a huge underdog, but a lot of times he wins it, man. And that feels like a total up for grabs possibility going into this one too.
How do you view this one in your eyes, AK? What do you expect to see when with these two guys locked in the big octagon, when the referee gives them the go ahead to start fighting and doing some work? What are you expecting to see out of these two gentlemen?
Listen, I think it'll go exactly as people are predicting it'll go. I think the on-paper analysis of it makes a lot of sense. We've seen Derrick Lewis in fights against these sort of more tactical strikers. Alexander Volkov's a good example. And he needed a very, very late flurry to escape with the win there. But it's kind of like what Sean was saying. It's at some point we have to be used to this strategy. We've seen him enough times where this is a very real, tangible thing that he can do. So while, yes, on paper, we say, well, Ciryl Gane's going to pick him apart, just like Ciryl Gane picked apart Jairzinho Rozenstruik, just like he won his fight with Alexander Volkov. He's just too technical for him. Derrick Lewis transcends predictions. Like, I would have thought Curtis Blades on paper, well, this is a great matchup for Curtis Blades. He's a great wrestler. He's going to control Derrick Lewis on the ground. We saw a little bit of that. But then Derrick Lewis it up. And again, swanging and banging. He jokes about it, it's sort of as this phrase for how he fights. It's real. It's a real way to fight. And we see it. I'll say this: if you watch lower level heavyweight fights on the regional scene around the world, and Russia, Serbia, things like that, you'll see a lot of swanging and banging from heavyweights. It's just that this guy, one, he has better technique than I think obviously he wants to admit. He's going to joke about how wild he is, how he doesn't care about jiu-jitsu. He just powers out of grappling positions. But I think with Derrick Lewis, there is a skill there. There's a lot of skill there, a lot of technique, but it's hidden underneath this affable personality, this kind of like, I just go in there. I'm not like one of those guys who trains 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But he looks, by the way, in great shape for this one. He said he's trained for this more than ever. He's feeling a little bit of pressure from having to fight in his hometown. So this is a very real moment for him. And for me, he's saying all the right things leading into this matchup. And I want to touch upon, I think, Sean, you said this is like a 7 for you. I think, Mike, you said the same thing earlier today, right? You said a 7 out of 10 for you, level of excitement, 6, 7?
6.5, 7, yeah.
6.5, 7. Our friend Spencer Kite, of course, said 10 out of 10, just completely jazzed for it. I landed on 8. EKC landed on 5, and somewhat for the same reason that Sean mentioned. It's not the fights that we wanted at heavyweight, but that's okay. I think judged on its own merits. Like, again, I stand by my 8 rating. I think there's a lot of intrigue here. And by the way, that interim gold shines the same as undisputed gold. Mike, you mentioned at the beginning. You mentioned at the beginning of the show, someone's mantle's gonna be a little bit shinier. You're right. The belts are identical. The belts are the same. So there's no, in the mind of these guys, it's certainly gonna be a nice feather in their cap. They can call themselves a UFC champion, whoever wins by the strictest definition of the term. And by the way, thank goodness for Dana White putting the interim title on the line, so these guys could be paid more. Because otherwise, as we all know, guys, unless there's a title on the line, you can't pay the fighters more. That's just not, that just doesn't work, right? Can't do that.
That's a whole other podcast right there.
I had to dumb it down at the end. I just wanted to see how it sounded saying it out loud, because I've seen so many people tweet it, and I'm like, do these people actually say this out loud, like thinking that that fighter pay really has to revolve around titles? And now that I've said it, it sounds even worse than when I've read it. So, you won't be hearing me say that again unless it's in a satirical way.
Wow. Look at AK. Little slight heel turn, not full heel turn, but we'll leave it at that. Sean, if you're Francis Ngannou, what are you hoping comes out of this fight? Because there's interesting storylines attached to both of these guys. And I mean, if you believe Dana White, winner's getting Ngannou. If you're Ngannou, what are you sort of hoping for? Can you even put yourself in those gigantic shoes of his?
Gigantic shoes are right. I can't even imagine what that guy's foot size is at this point. No, that's a great question, man. And you're right. I think both sides of the issue actually have good answers, right? Because we all saw Derrick Lewis versus Francis Ngannou 1. That fight, nobody nobody wants to remember that fight. I personally really enjoyed that fight because of a bet that I had with my old buddy, Mark Raimondi, for that fight. But I think I am the only person on the face of the earth who enjoyed that fight. So I'm sure that's one that sticks in Francis Ngannou's back, that I'm sure that's one that he wants to get back at some point. Whereas the other side of it, right, the Ciryl Gane versus Francis Ngannou conversation, going back to what I was just saying previously, with their old coach that they share and really being former training partners, teammates, that sort of thing, the way that that team sort of broke up, the way that partnership broke up, that to me is a fascinating fight. Like that is a tremendous fight on a lot of different levels. So I don't, if I'm Francis Ngannou, I think I would want the Derrick Lewis fight. I think that's probably a more marketable fight. It feels as if right now the fan base is a little low on Ciryl Gane because these last two fights haven't been the most exciting. But if Ciryl Gane comes in here and gets, something crazy, if he gets a first round knockout or first round submission or even, something early like that, I could see that being a very marketable fight and a fight that the UFC could go a long way with. So I think Francis Ngannou has good options coming out of either. But if I'm him, I do want that Black Beast fight back. I want to be able to show the world that I can beat this guy, and I can do it in a far different and more entertaining way than the last one.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to see Ngannou and Gane in Paris if they could somehow pull it off. But this is just, it could be a long time from now because of just what the world looks like. But AK, right now, and I know you love talking about this, you love to talk about playing the ponies. Our friends at DK Nation have Ciryl Gane listed as a minus 365 favorite. The comeback on Derrick the Black Beast Lewis is plus 280. Do you agree with those odds?
Wow, the disrespect. First of all, as always, do not bet on MMA, people. Never bet on MMA. Why are you betting on MMA? Invest that money in something that actually, it's not quite as sexy, but you'll get a definite return from. Don't bet on MMA. Why are you guys doing this? I think that's super high, but not surprising given, again, everything I've heard about and listened to, and even things I've probably said myself about this matchup. Again, on paper, this is Ciryl Gane's fight to lose. He is the more athletic, sort of faster, more technically sound fighter. And for whatever reason, Derrick Lewis just never quite gets the respect that he deserves. He's won 4 straight fights. And I still see, and again, this is a very small, specific sampling of the MMA community. I still see comments like, "Is Derrick Lewis really that good? Like, why does the guy keep getting title shots? Why is he ranked in the top 5?" And it's like his resume stands up against anybody that's fought at heavyweight and not just in any in the UFC in any company over the last 5 years. I never understand where this comes from. I think it's because he doesn't sell himself. I think it's because he plays that role of the talented, dummy so well. But again, I always thought he's smarter than he presents himself. He's a better fighter than he presents himself. But we're talking about how the public perceives him. And again, he is perceived as this guy who only just has a puncher's chance. And he's always winning on a puncher's chance. He's always coming from behind. So if you know that he's going to go down on the scorecards early, it is hard to pick him as sort of a favorite. So I understand that. I still think those odds are way too high. You said almost 4-1 favorite for Gane. Did you say minus 385?
Yeah. Minus 385. 365.
4-1, 365. So okay, about 3.5, but well over a 3-1 favorite. And you said Lewis almost 3-1 underdog.
Yep.
I assume. Yeah. That's a lot. That's a lot. I think people, again, like I said, stay away, people. Don't bet against Derrick Lewis in this kind of situation. Don't bet on Ciryl Gane. Don't bet against Ciryl Gane in the situation. I say just enjoy the fight for what it is. But I will say the odds, I'm not a fan. Don't like it. I do have to say, just jumping in, it's always been a really curious thing to me, just this idea, the perception that we have around Derrick Lewis. And I do wonder sort of why this exists and has permeated as long as he did. Because I think if that was your thought 3 years ago, right? They're like, this guy, he's not that great. He kind of gets lucky a lot. I could see thinking that a couple of years ago as he's sort of going on different runs. And it's like, oh, well, that one was lucky. That one was lucky. But at a certain point, that's just who this guy is. And I think a lot of it has to do with almost the meme ability of Derrick Lewis, if that makes any sense. The ability to sort of meme about how this guy functions within the space. And even in his fights, the whole thing of him just sort of standing up
from bottom position and how jujitsu isn't real and all of that. Like, it's fun to laugh about and it's fun to make jokes and, little graphics about, but ultimately it's true. Like, anytime this guy is on his back with anybody who's not Daniel Cormier, he just kind of stands up and it works. And it's worked for him for years. And anytime he's out of a fight, like he was against Alexander Volkov, he can just win it at the last possible second with some Hail Mary BS. And that's just who he is. And ultimately, if you're looking at a heavyweight skill set, that's a pretty great heavyweight skill set. The ability to just get up from bottom position at any point and the ability to win a fight at any point. Like, those are two really incredible assets to have on your side. And like you said, AK, if you put Derrick Lewis's last 5 years up in the UFC, last 6 years even in the UFC up against any other heavyweight outside of, the actual Stipe and the Francises, it weighs pretty well. Like, it measures up incredibly well. I don't know if he's a Hall of Famer yet. I wouldn't say I could go that far yet, but he is definitely a first ballot guy into the Hall of Very Good right now. And so just the way that this career has gone, it's bizarre. And I don't know that we'll ever see one like it, but it is pure Derrick Lewis. And I love that going into this fight, that he is just such a big underdog, because this is consistently what happens with this guy. And then he'll just pull something out of his back pocket. And it feels like that could totally happen again.
Dana White likes him, so he's probably a Hall of Famer. I really know that. I mean, that's, again, no disrespect to anyone else who's in there, but that's one of like the most basic measurements to get in. Are you a company guy? Does Dana White like you? So unless he gets into some pay disagreement with Dana White over the next couple of years, which seems highly unlikely, he's probably going to make it into the Hall of Fame and deserves to. I guess I just mean it in more of like a broader, like if there was like a real MMA Hall of Fame, that's people not voted on it. I know, that's not a thing.
That's not gonna.
Just wait till we start the MMA Fighting Hall of Fame.
We've already
look, guys, listen. We already solved rankings. We already rankings have been solved.
Did we collectively, AK?
I mean, look, I know a lot of great rankings out there. A lot of our colleagues do some great rankings, but I'm just going to say it. You only need one rankings now. It's MMAfighting.com rankings. We figured it out. We've solved the formula. People have been trying to do this for decades. We figured it out. So there you go. So I think the next thing to do, the MMA Fighting Hall of Fame, that will be the definitive Hall of Fame. Nobody will care about the UFC Hall of Fame anymore. But one thing I did want to add on to Sean's point is Derrick Lewis is goofy. He's a goofy guy. He's a goofy character, and bettors cannot put faith in goofy. You just can't. That's not how combat sports works. You want the more serious guy. Though by the way, I hope people are getting to see Ciryl Gane's personality a lot more, because he's a bon gamin. He's a big child. He's a big kid, right? I mean, so he in his own sense, there's a levity about him, but I guess he's not as well known as being this kind of jokester, this overt jokester that Derrick Lewis is. So yeah, that's just how people see Derrick Lewis, even though the resume and the results say something totally different.
Yeah, Derrick Lewis is like the Kevin Youkilis of MMA. Like, it doesn't make sense, but it works. But go back and watch the Curtis Blades fight. I
just had to bring it back to Boston. Had to bring it back to Boston.
Sean, every time. I swear.
Go watch the Curtis Blades fight. I'm telling you, very mature. He's maturing. He's more into the coaching staff that he's got around him, between Crew Bob, now bringing in Joe Murphy to help him with his jiu-jitsu and some of the ground stuff. Like, he's in a pretty good place right now. So it is an interesting fight. The line is a little wide, in my opinion. He was actually a bigger underdog in the Curtis Blades fight. But let's go to the predictions for this.
And that's really quickly. That's the thing too, is he downplays a lot of this, right? Like, you ask him even the most simple of questions about how was camp or how improvements or team or anything, he downplays every single aspect of it. And I think that too plays into sort of this narrative and perception around him of this idea that he isn't someone who takes this seriously, or he isn't someone who sort of has the skills that he actually does. It's just because he's constantly putting it out there. And I think he does it obviously he does it on purpose. He does it because he gets a kick out of just messing with the rest of us.
Yeah. It eases the tension for him, and whatever get you to get your hand raised. But Sean, we're going to begin with you on the prediction side. Who's going to walk out of the Toyota Center with the interim heavyweight championship? Is Derrick Lewis going to send the Houston faithful home happy, or is Ciryl Gane going to turn some smiles into frowns?
Man, this is such a hard fight to predict for a lot of the reasons that we've already mentioned here. So I'm just going to go out on a limb. I have this feeling, and sometimes you just have this weird feeling that you can't quite explain it. I feel like this is going to be Derrick Lewis's night. This is going to be the night where we can always sort of say Derrick Lewis cemented himself as, this top tier, first tier heavyweight, despite all odds, despite nobody really believing he was that guy. I could see Derrick Lewis just getting his ass kicked here for like 15, 20 minutes and then just landed something in round 4, round 3, round 5, something late like that. And just doing exactly what he's made a career out of at this point. Ciryl Gane has been in the cage with some absolute demons, but is still just not nearly as polished and experienced, I think, as he will be, obviously, 3, 4, 5 years down the line. I think if you're going to catch him, this is probably the good time to catch him. And this is a big moment for him, man. I mean, he is coming into enemy territory. The way this sort of played out for Derrick of being able to do this in Houston, I mean, I can't even imagine how crazy that crowd is going to be behind him, that he's going to be having them eaten out of the palm of his hand. So I just see it being Derrick Lewis's night, and a night that we always remember as maybe the best night of his career, or at least sort of this seminal moment for his career where he sort of took that next step. So I'm picking Derrick Lewis by some sort of late knockout, and I think he's probably going to get his ass kicked up until that point.
AK, your thoughts? Who gets the interim title tomorrow night?
Listen, Ciryl Gane is an amazing prospect, but his fights with like Volkov, Jairzinho, JDS, those were not even really, those are mixed martial arts bouts. This was a fight. This is going to be, he hasn't met maybe Tanner Boser a little bit, but Tanner Boser doesn't have the power of Derrick Lewis. He's never fought as volatile a property as Derrick Lewis. I don't know if he'll be ready when he's, as Sean suggests, he's kind of cruising through 2.5 rounds, 3 rounds, and then suddenly Derrick Lewis just goes nuts on him and just starts winging, just swanging and banging like a maniac. I'm not sure if he's going to know how to deal with that. It's just, that's just something you learn with experience, right? And he just doesn't. Again, like I said, 10th pro bout. Of course, I'm going with Lewis. Similar prediction, but I'm going to be very specific. I think a 4th round. I think we're going to go 4th round. Derrick Lewis win, TKO, finish strikes, and we'll start to see the worm turn a little bit in the 3rd. I think we'll see Lewis kind of catch him with something, or at least threaten with a big shot that gets the commentators going. Like, man, he was inches away there. Imagine if the timing was just a little bit different. And I think we'll see that timing. See him find that timing in the 4th frame. So yeah, Derrick Lewis is about to become a UFC champion, and again, join other interim championship greats: Dustin Poirier, Tony Ferguson, Carlos Condit, guys who, again, Poirier still has a chance, but for the most part, never won the undisputed title. Guess what? They're still pretty damn great fighters, and I think Derrick Lewis is gonna do that too.
Look, I've gone on record. I'll say it again. There's a very good chance that this fight is not a good fight, that it's not entertaining, that it's not at all fun. And this is going to end in one of 2 ways, in my opinion. One, Gane is just going to cruise to a very easy, simple, not all that exciting 50-45 that gets him the title, but not a ton of fans. Or Lewis is going to capitalize on one mistake, and that's all it needs. He's going to land one big right hand, and the fight's going to be over. 25 minutes is a long, long time, and Gane is going to be playing a very dangerous game. I say Ciryl Gane wins every single second of this fight for the first 8 or so minutes, and then he's going to get tagged with one big shot. Derrick wins. He moves on to fighting Ngannou. And I think, kind of like what Sean said in regards to Derrick Lewis, I think this is going to be a very important fight in the career history of Ciryl Gane. We're going to be looking back on this fight, that result, about how much he has grown from this loss to Derrick Lewis, and being able to bounce back from making a very pivotal mistake and getting back to a title shot by maybe the end of 2022, early 2023. So I think in the story of Ciryl Gane, I think it's going to have a huge impact, even though he doesn't win and loses his first professional MMA fight. But he's going to look damn good until that right hand lands, and that's going to be a wrap. Derrick Lewis gets it done, sends the fans home happy. We'll get a promo of some sort out of Derrick Lewis that we'll all enjoy, and we'll move on to the next one on Sunday. But co-main event.
Lewis across the board.
Look at that.
I like that. Lewis
upsets
across the board. Sean, call Mark. Get the Shuey bet sequel going. I think you might lose this time, though, because I'm sure you'll probably predict again that an Ngannou Lewis rematch will once again disappoint. But I'm just saying, let Mark know. Get that Shuey ready. Fill that Shuey up now. We'll get that rematch.
I'm texting him as we speak.
Yes.
I could not. I am stunned that for someone who is a 3-1 underdog, almost a 4-1, we just clean swept him across the board like that. But I also feel like that sentiment is pretty pervasive in the MMA community right now. So it's a very bizarre fight in a lot of different ways, right?
You might say we're smarter than the average person. I think that's how
I definitely would not say that.
That's how I would put it. That's how maybe I'm speaking for myself.
Yeah. If you really want to get a gauge of how good at picking fights we are, just look at our results from last week's UFC
moving
card.
on.
And then
you were saying my co-main event.
Congratulations early to Cyril Gane for becoming
yes. Co-main event, as you were saying.
Yes.
Yeah, don't need to.
It is a great fight. We got Jose Aldo taking on Pedro Munoz. And Sean, I thought about this earlier this morning. I know you don't need a lot to sell you on this fight because Jose Aldo is your guy, but when we think of the bantamweight division, it's all about the top, right? The sort of log jam, like who's next for the title shot? When's Sterling Yan going to happen? Is Dillashaw next? Is Font next? Where's Sandhagen? It's all kind of a mess up the top. But a fun byproduct of having that problem is you get fights like this. You get Jose Aldo versus Pedro Munoz, and we can appreciate it for the fight that it is. Like, it's not a number one contenders bout. There's no giant career altering stakes. It's just two really fun, exciting fighters getting in there and scrapping, man. Like, I could not love this fight anymore. What are your thoughts on this matchup and just being able to kind of loosen up a bit when we think about it?
I love it. I absolutely love it. And so, as I said, Jose Aldo is my guy. So I'll go into that in a second, but I do have to say right off the top, I feel like we need to appreciate Pedro Munoz a little more than we do. 3 of this guy's last 4 fights have been fighting.
Oh, yes.
Like, he is low key one of the most exciting, underrated in terms of excitement guys in this whole sport. Like, he goes out there and almost every time guaranteed, it's just going to be some sort of craziness. It's going to be some sort of firefight, just some sort of ridiculous. He's drawn great fights out of Jimmy Rivera, for God's sake. Like, that's a really hard thing to do, to draw exciting fights out of Jimmy Rivera in the UFC. And Pedro Munoz has done it. We don't give this guy the respect he deserves. And if you look at the actual losses that he's suffered over the last 3-4 years, it's literally just, Aljamain Sterling. And then that really, I don't know that he lost to Frankie Edgar. I think that split decision was a pretty bad decision, but we can call it that if you want. But that's
Disagree.
not. Well, you are the robbery master, so I will defer to you on that.
And a Frankie fanboy.
But Pedro Munoz does, I guess ultimately my point is he doesn't get the respect he deserves when it comes to these type of fights, when we're talking about our excitement level for him. So I'm in on any Pedro Munoz fight right off the bat. But as you said, Jose Aldo, my guy. Living legend, still in my mind, maybe the greatest featherweight of all time, just historically. I know he lost to Max Holloway twice. We don't need to relitigate that. That doesn't matter. I'm just saying, I love anytime we can see Jose Aldo. And I think the fact that he is still, what is he? He's 34 years old at this point, and he is still out here just treating us to absolute shows, putting on blockbusters like he did against Marlon Vera. That was a tremendous fight. And he's just still bringing new tricks out of his bag, like he did against Marlon Vera. I never expected ever this bantamweight experiment would work for him. I was one of the loudest critics of this when it first happened. Felt very reactionary okay, you lost to Alexander Volkanovski, but really you're going to go down to bantamweight? Like, you're someone who has always struggled making weight even at 145. How is 135 going to work for you? But he has totally proven me wrong. I mean, Jose Aldo, at this point, you can't doubt this man. He has somehow made it work for himself at bantamweight. He looks pretty good here. And he was looking pretty good against Peter Yan before that fight sort of turned midway through, right? Like, the first few rounds, Jose Aldo was making that very competitive. He is a living legend. And to see him in a spot like this, in an exciting fight like this, it's just a treat. I treasure every Jose Aldo fight we get. And this to me has fireworks written all over it.
AK wax poetically on the magic that is Jose Aldo versus Pedro Munoz.
Yeah. Look, I touched upon this sort of idea with Nunes at the beginning. We got to cherish any appearances that these all-time great champions can make. Because I think Aldo, frankly, is one of the top 5 pound for pound best fighters of all time. His featherweight run is sadly just not brought up as much as it was before because of that loss to Conor McGregor and some middling results after. And by middling results, we mean, again, he lost 2 fights to friggin' Max Holloway, the other greatest featherweight of all time. So
and beat your boy, prime Frankie Edgar, twice convincingly.
I don't recall. But prior to that, again, I just wish people, and also WEC, of course, is something that has faded in the memory. But I hope when it's all said and done, people look back on his run from, I'm just looking at from 2007 to 2014. Just some of the most exciting, dominant performances. His opponents were almost uniformly legit super good guys. If people look at the winning streaks and the resumes of the guys he fought, It's good. I think it's only comparable to like GSP, John Jones, again, other guys that we rank among the top of the pound for pound when we talk about those sorts of things, right? And even now, he is putting on these great fights. Like, other than maybe the Volkanovski fight, that probably wasn't super entertaining, especially if you're an Aldo fan. It wasn't really that fun to watch. The Marlon Moraes fight was so good, so intriguing. His first fight at 135. The Petr Yan fight, as you said, it's almost kind of forgotten how good that fight was. I think I left it out of my top 5 of the fight of the year last year. That fight was awesome. That fight with Petr Yan was so good. And look, the younger man won. The younger man, I think, had a little bit more in the tank, pulled away in the 5th, and won the fight. That's how it's going to go with Jose Aldo. But 3-round fight, looked great against Marlon Vera. Will probably look great on Saturday, again, with a very like-minded striker. So I hope when people talk about guys like Aldo and Dominic Cruz and whoever else at the stage of their careers, the last thing they worry about is, oh, could this fight get them back to a title shot? Who cares? Who cares, guys? This card is a real referendum on what is the meaning of a title. And I think an interim title being on the line in the main event does not make it more interesting to me than a Jose Aldo like Pedro Munoz fight. This fight doesn't need a title. It's just a great matchup between two great fighters. And I wish that's all the fans should care about. Titles are cool. Rankings are great, especially the MMAfighting.com global rankings. But at the end of the day, don't you want to just see great fighters fight each other? That's what this co-main event is. That's what the epitome of. Who cares what it means, what the win or loss means for either guy? It's just going to be a great fight.
Are you able to pick this fight, Sean? Like, is it even fair? Or is it automatically Aldo and doesn't, what are we thinking?
I mean, sure, there's always a little bit of bias when it comes to a Jose Aldo fight for me, but I am picking Jose Aldo. I do feel like he has looked really good, surprisingly good at bantamweight. And again, I'm someone who thinks very highly of Chito Vera. Like, you're not going to find me ever crapping on Chito Vera in any regard. I think he's probably one of the most underrated guys in this whole division. And Jose Aldo did work against him. And that to me was really impressive, especially because Jose Aldo sort of has this Shogun Rory McDonald type of thing with his age, where he's been around a lot longer than that 34 would suggest. And so in fight years, maybe he's not 34. So it does feel like he's more of an older guy than we sort of place him when it comes to the age. So to see Jose still doing this and real performing at such an immensely high level this late into his career, I love it. It doesn't feel like he's close right now to diminishing in any major way from where he's currently at. So I love it. I think this is a perfect showcase fight for Jose. I think it's going to be all action, and I do think he wins it in the end.
Okay, who do you got?
Yeah, I'm with Sean. I am picking Aldo. I'm going to go Aldo by decision. I still think he's just one of the best strikers in the world. The only thing that's a question now is cardio. 5-round fights. Those are always going to be, if he ever ends up in one of those again, maybe some fight night main event, those are always going to be difficult for him. Especially at bantamweight, where it's just a division of young, hungry killers. But in a 3-round fight, which again I expect mostly to be comprised of stand-up, I cannot go against Aldo. I know he lost the Moraes fight. A lot of people thought he won that. It's a super close fight. And then other than that, the only other decision was Volkanovski, who might be the best featherweight in the world. So if you're going to a decision with Aldo, boy, you really got to be at a certain level. Munoz is certainly up there. I have a lot of respect for him, but I don't think he's got the stand-up skills to beat Aldo yet. So it could be Aldo takes the first 2 rounds, late charge by Munoz, but either way, I think Aldo's going to win on the cards.
Yeah, I think Aldo gets his hand raised. I think everybody wins, though. Pedro Munoz wins. I think his stock rises after this fight, and we all win for getting the opportunity to watch it. So rest of the main card, we got Michael Chiesa versus Vicente Luque. Really important fight at 170. Tisha Torres versus Angela Hill 2. A little bit of heat between those two ladies. Main card opener at 135. Really fun fight between Casey Kenny and Song Yadong. One thing to note, Manel Kape, a lot of people feel this is a do or die fight for him. I would say that rings more true now than ever before after missing weight by 3 pounds. His fight with Ode Osborne will happen. Kape will forfeit 20% of his purse to Osborne. But we're going to leave you with our low-key storylines of the night. Sean, what fighter storyline do you have your eye on heading into tomorrow night that may not be getting the attention it deserves?
Sure. And I think that's wide open because I think a lot of these fights aren't getting the attention they deserve, right? Like it feels like we're not really hearing about anything other than maybe Derrick Lewis and Cyril Gane. I have to say, maybe it's a bit of a cop-out, but for me, it's that third fight on that pay-per-view card, sort of that swing bout in the middle, the welterweights. It is I am so conflicted because these are both my guys. I mean, Michael Chiesa and Vicente Luque are two guys I have been banging the drum for in this 170-pound division for a long time. In particular, Vicente Luque, who in my mind is one of the most violent men in this entire sport. If you have an all violence first team, he has to be on it at this point, right? Like the run that he has been on. I don't even know offhand off the top of my head, but I think he's won something of like 13 of 15 or something like that in the UFC, and like all of them except for one have been finishes, and most of those finishes are just incredibly destructive, violent finishes. This man is guaranteed entertainment every time out, and Michael Chiesa has really turned things around at 170. Man, he kind of hit a bit of a roadblock there at 155 with his weight and going through those couple losses to Anthony Pettis and Kevin Lee. But I've really liked how he's looked at 170. I mean, he looks like someone who actually will matter in this division, someone we'll need to care about, and who's going to be in this title picture sooner rather than later. 4 straight Condit, Sanchez, RDA, and Magny. That RDA one in particular and Magny, both of those I think are very high quality wins. So I absolutely love that fight. That feels to me like the two styles at play. Chiesa more of a grinder, Luque more of just an all-action banger who's just going to let it all go. That feels like that's going to be really fun. And it's ultimately the winner of this fight. The 170-pound division is in a very weird place right now, right? Like we know it's going to be Colby Covington and Kamaru Usman, but outside of that, it feels like anything is up for grabs. Who knows with Leon Edwards? Who knows with the rest of the guys up there at the top? Gilbert Burns is sort of floating around. You have all sorts of matchups that could be made. Stephen Thompson needs to come back up. Whoever wins this fight between Chiesa and Luque, they're going to cement themselves for a big fight moving forwards, whether it's a Leon Edwards type or a Gilbert Burns type, or even just somebody on that, maybe that next level, like a Stephen Thompson. They're going to be in a big, probably fight night type of main event, whoever wins this. And so I love it. I love the stakes of it. I love the characters involved. I love the styles at play. Everything about this just screams fun for me.
AK, what you got?
Obviously, I love the Bobby Green, Rafael Fiziev fight. I actually think that right up there with Jose Aldo and Munoz as my pick for a fight of the night. It's just going to be an unbelievable 3 rounds of action. I just know it. I think we get the good version of Bobby Green. I think we get a very hungry Rafael Fiziev, and I think it's like just a perfect stand-up style matchup. But I am really focused, and I wasn't until we kind of talked about it more this morning at the weigh-ins. I'm really kind of focused on what's going to happen with both Karolina Kowalkiewicz and Jessica Penne. I think we could see a retirement. I think we could see a retirement on Saturday. And I know both these names are kind of flying under the radar, at least more than they were maybe 2 or 3 years ago. A lot of inactivity, quite a few losses for both these women. But there was a time when they were, these two are pioneers, at least of the UFC strawweight division. Jessica Pena, I think, was Joanna Jędrzejczyk's first title defense, if I'm not mistaken. Karolina, of course, was a big title title challenge against Joanna at Madison Square Garden. So they really helped build what I think has become a good division. And they're both, again, very experienced, a little bit up there in age, and both dealing with some struggles. If Karolina Kowalkiewicz loses, this will be her 5th straight loss. She won't have had a win since April 2018, 3 years. She's taken damage in these fights. She's not just losing kind of like these pitter-patter decisions. She's taken some real damage in these fights. And I think even after her last one, she kind of made one of those, Instagram, social media posts that's like, oh, dude, I got to think about some things. Not saying she's retiring, but certainly the kind of talk that makes you wonder how much longer this fighter wants to be in there. Jessica Penne, this will be just her 2nd fight since 2017. Again, she's almost 39 years old. So if she, and look, and both these fighters, if they feel like they're in great shape, they love showing up training, they want to fight, more power to them. You can see them fight for another 5 years. But I do think a tough loss on Saturday will probably spell the end of one of these fighters' UFC runs. And who knows, we might also see one of them leave the gloves inside the cage. And I have a lot of respect for both women. So that's why I bring this up, because I hope if it does happen, it doesn't get overlooked among whatever other drama happens to emerge on Saturday. So I know I'm eulogizing ahead of time. So to both Kowalkiewicz and Pena, I apologize for that. But should it happen, again, happy trails, and fans to give them the respect.
I mean,
yeah, AK, you mentioned the damage that Karolina has sort of taken. I feel like that is an underrated story, or maybe not underrated, but underplayed storyline, sort of with this slide that she's been on. Because I remember being there in Dallas when all of this started, and Jessica Andrade just knocked her out in like 2 minutes. And that scary knockout at UFC 228 is one of the most brutal and violent women's, not even just women's knockouts, but just knockouts in general that you will see in this sport. Like if you go back and rewatch that one 3 years ago, God, that is a nasty one. And really it felt like it, not even it felt like it, it all kind of started from there because Carolina obviously hasn't won a fight since then. So you're absolutely right there with the damage being an underrated aspect to sort of this run that she's been on, or this slide, I should say.
And the first knockout loss of a career, that's got to affect you. You know what I mean? Again, I'm not a fighter. I can't speak for her, but as a human being, I can't imagine how that does not affect you going forward. Right.
Yeah. I think all of you made good answers, good pleas. I mean, I think Chiesa Luque is the actual answer to this question about underrated, under the radar, and not getting enough attention for the stakes and what is on the line. I'll go Casey Kenny versus Song Yadong. The fight just rules. It's in an important spot, considering some of these other fights on here, because this is the table setter. There's a reason this fight is opening up the main cards, because there's a lot of hope that this fight delivers the goods. And I have a hard time believing any two guys just outside of the top 15 in a division like this. And I'm hoping the bonus structure gets bumped up to 75 again. Hopefully we find that out by the end of the day, but that'll be certainly in contention for the fight of the night. But listen, this isn't the marquee of names you would typically look for a UFC pay-per-view, but this will be a fun card, my friends. And you can follow along with us throughout the night. Casey, the rogue panelist Leiden, is in Houston. He will have all of your post-fight scrums, videos, pressers, etc., and we'll have you covered throughout the night. So until then, for Sean and AK, I am Mike Hack. Thank you for watching. We will see you tomorrow night.
You're listening to the Vox Media Podcast Network.